Hello and welcome everyone to Every Movie Ever. I'm your host Eric, and this is the show where we are reviewing every movie ever made, starting with The Greatest Showman, the Hugh Jackman tour de force vanity project that I recently saw in what I think is the way that all of the artists involved truly intended, on a seat-back TV screen on an aeroplane. Yes, I saw The Greatest Showman on a screen no bigger than this, which, like I say, has to be what everyone always envisioned. Listen, gang, The Greatest Showman is, at best, I think, a controversial picture, in that it's a movie about P.T. Barnum, a real-life historical figure, one half of Barnum and Bailey, who started his career with his Museum of Oddities, which was sort of an aggrandized version of what was contemporaneously called a freak show, right? With a lot of different performers, like a bearded lady and a little person and a really tall guy and a really overweight guy, displayed as, again, to use the parlance, freaks. This movie posits that that was a brave and bold thing for Barnum to do, and that he treated his performers, or at least strove to, with respect and fairness, although the movie shows him stumble at times. The reason that this movie is somewhat controversial is because that doesn't pan out at all with the historical Barnum, who I'm going to stop short of calling a monster, but was certainly someone who was in the habit of exploiting his performers and treating them unfairly, as well as being involved in a lot of other societal ills, such as slavery. And this movie glosses over all of that to give us a Barnum that we should think of as a hero, which is dangerous, right? To take these historical figures who are not people who should necessarily be idolized, and to portray them in this light is troubling, right? But setting that aside, how about the movie? Is the movie something? Kind of. It's a difficult movie to assess, both because of those historical reasons and because it is not a movie that succeeds in the way I think it wants to succeed, right? Like this is, it's a big, bold movie musical, or if not bold, brassy movie musical. And I'm certainly a fan of movie musicals, and this is an original one, not one that was translated from Broadway, and I wish we had more of that sort of thing. But this one doesn't succeed quite. It's a movie that, on its own terms, thinks it's this great, big, fun, Broadway-style movie production, and it kind of isn't. What it is camp as all get out, right? It is unintentionally funny and over the top in ways that clearly they didn't intend us to see them in. So, on its own terms, I don't really think it succeeds, but as a movie that is, if not so bad it's good, that is, sort of watchable for its flaws and its bizarre exaggerations, it succeeds there somewhat for the viewer. Part of this has to do with lackluster direction. This is a movie that thinks it's Moulin Rouge, but without Baz Luhrmann at the helm, ends up being something substantially less interesting to look at all times. Although it does feature a number of crazy dance numbers, I use the word crazy intentionally here because these aren't like the big, mind-blowing dance numbers of Moulin Rouge that are combining sort of a semi-authentic idea of what dancing was like at the Moulin Rouge at the cusp of the 20th century, along with modern dance and, melding those two things. I mean crazy, what are these people doing? Who choreographed this thing and why kind of sense. Combined with that, a ton of super forgettable songs. There have to be, a dozen songs in this movie. One of them is sort of vaguely memorable, and that's the This Is Me song, where all of the performers get together and sing about how it doesn't matter what the world thinks of me, I'm going to be me, which again is somewhat at odds with the history here and with the way these characters are treated in the movie, right? This is not a movie about the performers, it's a movie about Barnum. So when you try to push the performers front and center, they're still under Barnum's shadow, which makes this song ring somewhat hollow. Additionally, it's a sort of simple, ballad song that's going to work real well in promos for NBC programming. The showstopper for me in this whole thing has got to be, though, the song Never Enough. I did love this song, as sung in the movie by Rebecca Ferguson playing real-life opera performer Jenny Lind. This sequence is tremendous. It is a very simple and minimal scene, so it stands at odds with the rest of the movie, which is trying and failing to be frenetic. This scene is just a beautiful woman in a cream-colored dress singing just super passionately, largely in close-up, this song about wanting more, right? It's a very powerful scene, and it's a scene that is, in some ways, I think, sort of a microcosm of the movie as a whole, because Kang loved this scene. When I looked it up later, when I had my Wi-Fi back after being on the airplane, Rebecca Ferguson, the actress, doesn't sing the song. It's sung by a woman named Lauren Allred, right? So the performer in the movie is just lip-syncing the song, and why wouldn't you cast someone in this role as one of the most famous opera singers of all time who can actually sing for herself? It is mind-boggling and only adds to the sort of failure and camp aspect of this movie, the unintentionally bizarre nature of the movie. So what did I think about it? All that said, I gotta say I liked it. I liked it from that camp point of view. As far as the movie it's trying to be, it's a complete failure. But as this big, overblown spectacle that you can't take your eyes off of for a variety of reasons, that it sort of works in. And that's why I'm going to give The Greatest Showman a whopping 3.5 stars. Speaking of flawed true stories, let's talk about Julie and Julia. This is the movie from a few years back where Amy Adams plays Julie, a woman who becomes obsessed with the cookbooks and writings and life of Julia Child. The movie is set in two time periods, one in the present, where Amy Adams is trying to make all of these recipes from Julia Child's cookbook and write a blog about it. And the other half of the movie is Meryl Streep playing Julia Child and telling her life. The half of this movie that is the life of Julia Child, featuring Meryl Streep at a terrific turn from Stanley Tucci as Julia Child's husband, and their life in Europe as Julia starts to become interested in cooking and in writing a cookbook. That is a tremendous movie. That is a movie I would watch all day and all night. And when the movie ends just before her reaching her greatest fame, I become frustrated and I really desperately want to see more. The other half of this movie that is Amy Adams wanting to be Julia Child is not terribly inspired or interesting. Amy Adams is as good as always in the role, but this sequence never really meshes, is never terribly entertaining. There's a sequence toward the end where Julie finds out that Julia Child, who's still alive, has heard of her and doesn't care for it. And while the movie, plays that for a certain amount of pathos from Amy Adams, never really goes anywhere with it. We never get to find out why Julia Child felt that way or what's going on or see a meeting of the two. Largely, every time Amy Adams is on screen, you just want to return to the Julia Child, Meryl Streep parts, not because Amy Adams is bad, but because Meryl Streep is that good. I mean, this is one of her hit it out of the ballpark, amazing performances. And the way the movie ends without going further in Julia's story and stopping Julie's so-so story kind of raises the question of what was the point of this whole movie. So it's half a great movie, half an okay movie. I've got to average it out at 3.5 stars. Folks, it's time for a Hollywood classic. Today I want to talk to you about Nancy Drew, Detective. This is the first of a series of, I believe, 4 movies about Nancy Drew, who turns out to be a way older character than I thought, having appeared in movies in the 1930s. I remember those books being around when I was a kid and thinking that they were something that first came out when my parents were young, when in reality they first came out when my grandparents were young, and that's a little bit surprising. Nancy Drew Detective is a charming movie. The leads, particularly Benita Granville as Nancy Drew and Frankie Thomas as Ted, her pseudo-boyfriend. Those performances are super charming, and I could spend a lot of time with those two characters and performers. As for the movie itself, the plot is somewhat forgettable as far as what the mystery is. It involves an old lady who's gone missing, and I'd have a hard time telling you more than that. There is a nice plot point involving homing pigeons, where they're able to sort of follow a homing pigeon in a great scene where they're trying to follow a homing pigeon from their car. But, you know, that's about all there is to it. Benita Granville, like I said, was a terrific performer in this. I did find myself wondering what became of her later in her career, and it turns out she was a real powerhouse producer behind the scenes as a producer on Lassie, of all things, making her one of the first sort of big name or powerful women behind the scenes of like a television show. So, you know, good for her. So yeah, it's a charming enough movie, a good diversion if you happen to find it on cable. 3.5 stars. I'm going to give you a quick double feature here in Hollywood Classics because, like I say, I found the leads of Nancy Drew Detective so charming I wanted to keep going and watch the second Nancy Drew movie. This was Nancy Drew Reporter. It's still a very charming movie. Nancy and her boyfriend are still very charming and likable characters. However, in this case, wherein Nancy Drew has entered a contest to write a newspaper story and finds another mystery, this mystery is even more forgettable, right? I would be hard-pressed to tell you anything now, a couple days later, about what the story or mystery in this movie was. This movie does add a nice wrinkle of having a couple of little kids, one of who I believe is Nancy's boyfriend's brother or sister, and then her friend. These two little kids are added in as sort of a Greek chorus, showing up every so often to comment on what's going on in the movie a bit. And that's a fun little wrinkle, but again, it's such a forgettable movie story-wise that it's hard to give it more than 3 stars. All right, friends, now it is time for MST 3A to Z. Longtime viewers, you know, this is the part of the show where we are watching every Mystery Science Theater 3000 movie in alphabetical order from A to Z because I am a nerd. And that means that this week we are brought up to Cave Dwellers. This is a movie that has been released under a number of different titles, including Ator the Invincible and Blade Master. It stars Miles O'Keefe in a sub-Conan the Barbarian knockoff, a sword and sandals movie. The problem with this one, however, is that it is excruciatingly boring as we watch Miles, who plays Ator, run around in a lot of caves and other murky scenery for no discernible reason, but involving a quest to help a lady go free her dad from an evil warlord or something. It's an interminable movie. I don't have a ton to say about it except to give it a single star. Look out! It's an action explosion! This week in our action movie section, I want to look at Friday Foster. This is, believe it or not, I believe outside of Jackie Brown, this is, I believe, the first Pam Grier movie I've watched the whole thing of. Obviously, I'm a Pam Grier fan. She's one of the great, 70s film stars, one of the great stars of the blaxploitation genre, and really one of the very first female action stars. And watching her in this movie, watching her as a younger woman, you get it, right? She has it. Whatever that it is, that star power, that star quality, Pam Grier has it, and she has it in spades. She is extremely watchable, both now and, like I say, here in her younger days. And she is what makes Friday Foster a movie that's worth watching at all. It's a movie that has a terrific cast. In addition to Pam, you have the great Yaphet Kotto, who I loved so much in Homicide, life on the streets. He's in it. The great Scatman Crothers of The Shining and various cartoon voiceovers. He's in it. And you also have Carl Weathers of Rocky fame showing up in it. The problem with the movie, which is features Pam Grier as the eponymous Friday Foster, an investigative journalist trying to get to the bottom of a crime and murder, is that crime and murder are very forgettable. I had a little bit of difficulty following the plot. I would have trouble now telling you what it was about. It seemed to be an effort to discredit a leader in the African American community, and I think that a white senator was involved, but it's somewhat difficult to follow. But again, Pam Grier, and to a lesser extent the rest of the cast, are so likable that makes up for it. And lets me give Friday Foster 3 stars. All right, now let's chug along to Animation Station. Today I want to talk about The Sword in the Stone. This is the Disney movie that is about the youth of King Arthur as he is trained by Merlin, based in part on T.S. Eliot's novel, The Sword in the Stone. This is a Disney movie that, while I remember fondly revisiting it now, it's not that great. Like, it's okay. It's sort of a boring movie with some stretches where nothing really happens. The animation is sketchy. We're getting into that era of Disney animation where the money and care and attention that was being lavished onto the earlier productions aren't there. The budgets are not as high as they once were, and it shows. There are some memorable parts to it. The squirrel sequence is one that stuck out in my head from when I was a kid, and I'm happy to say it still works really well, where Merlin turns himself and Arthur into squirrels so that Arthur can, learn some kind of a lesson. I'm a little vague on that. Also, the Wizard Duel, where Merlin battles a witch named Madame Mim, and they each transform into different creatures in a battle of sort of one-upsmanship, is a very entertaining and interesting sequence. Unfortunately, like I say, much of the rest of the movie is a little meh. I like the portrayal of Merlin as sort of a man out of time. There have been these ideas of Merlin in various media as a man who has aged, or has lived life rather backwards, so that our tomorrow is his yesterday, sort of. And that works somewhat in this movie, where he will have memories of things like locomotives and television that haven't existed yet. So it's both an interesting idea and sort of a precursor to things like the genie in Aladdin or Shrek, these medieval or historically based characters who seem to have a preternatural knowledge of our modern popular culture. I don't know. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not really saying. I'm just saying that it is. In this movie, I think it works. In Aladdin, it kind of works. In Shrek, it becomes grating. And now it's de rigueur, such as it were. So The Sword in the Stone, an all right movie. Not really a Disney classic, I wouldn't say, but all right. 3 stars. Now it is time for no one's favorite part of the show. This is the worst of the week. You guys, Keanu Reeves is currently undergoing a sort of a career renaissance, right? In addition to there being a lot of talk once more about a third Bill and Ted movie, which I'm all in favor of, you've got him absolutely killing it in the John Wick movies, right? Like, just when you think Keanu is probably done as a performer, John Wick comes out, blows us all away, right? So it is with this in mind that we return to the 90s, to Keanu's pre-Matrix career, and look at Johnny Mnemonic. Whew. It's interesting to watch this movie knowing that The Matrix, which is a sort of similarly, conceived of, it's in the ballpark, right? Because this is a movie where Keanu Reeves plays an assassin in the future with like a hard drive in his head that he uses to smuggle digital files around for people. Now, in today's day and age where you can attach things to an email and send them that way, that you would need to upload something into a dude's head and have him physically run it over to you is pretty silly. But they didn't know that then. Bleh. This is an ugly movie. It doesn't look good. It looks really sleazy in an uninviting way. The plot doesn't make a lot of sense. The ideas aren't there to buoy any of it, and the plot, such as it is confusing. You do have Ice-T in this movie as a guy who's a semi-ally of Johnny's. Dolph Lundgren plays a disheveled, I'm not sure if he's an ex-priest or if that's just a styling that they've given the character assassin who's on Keanu's trail. Is there an awesome scene where Keanu fights Dolph? No. There's a scene where there's a confrontation, certainly, but nothing exciting. The most exciting thing in this movie, cyborg dolphin. Otherwise, not great. I will give a little bit of a shout out to actress Dinah Meyer, who I adored as Dizzy in Starship Troopers. She's in this as sort of the aide-de-camp or reluctant protector of Johnny a little bit later into the movie. She does okay, and she's an actress that I don't feel like I've seen in movies enough, so I enjoyed seeing her in this, but it's a trash character in a trash movie. 1.5 stars. And now, best of the bunch. So at the beginning of the show, we talked about how I saw The Greatest Showman, the only way you can see The Greatest Showman, on an airplane. Wasn't the only movie I watched on the airplane, folks. I also watched 3 Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri. This was a mistake to watch on an aeroplane. Like, I'd seen the trailers for this. I'm familiar with the director's other work, which includes silly films like In Bruges. We had kind of thought that this would be sort of a quirky, movie of the kind of sort of akin to one of the Coen brothers' more comedic efforts, right? It is not. First off, it's an amazing movie. I don't want to, even though I watched it under less than ideal circumstances, the power of this movie still came through that tiny screen. It is an amazing movie, but it is very dour. The movie follows Frances McDormand, who's a mother whose daughter has been murdered, and she becomes frustrated with the lack of police progress in finding the murderer, and so she rents out 3 billboards and puts signs up on the billboards about why, what's up, police, why haven't you found my daughter's killer? Woody Harrelson is the sheriff who is arguably trying his best with the resources and talent at his disposal to find it out, and becomes obviously frustrated with McDormand's tactics. Sam Rockwell plays another deputy who should not be a deputy, and is as close as the movie comes to. I guess I don't want to call him the villain of the piece, because he ultimately has somewhat of a redemptive arc. And Sam Rockwell these are all tremendous actors. Frances McDormand, absolutely killing it in this movie. Woody Harrelson, it's hard to believe that he was Woody in Cheers when you see him in such a thoughtful and nuanced performance as this. And Sam Rockwell, who is, to me, an all-timer, one of our current acting MVPs, really nailing this sleazeball, small-town deputy character. It's an absorbing movie. It's an emotional movie. Is this a movie that racked me with sorrow and tears on an airplane? Yeah, it is. So, that on a flight to Iceland, what you want is to be the person who's on the plane sobbing because of the movie that you're watching. There's a particularly harrowing sequence in the middle involving Woody Harrelson's character that I don't want to spoil for you, but the themes and the actions that are involved in that sequence are some of the best portrayed, I think, in the history of cinema. What he does and why he does it is so emotional and understandable and done with such grace and dignity. Again, I don't want to spoil it, but I wish more movies would approach that subject in that way. It's a tremendous movie, not a movie to watch on an airplane. Also, it is a movie that coincidentally I have a baseball cap of. I was at an event at a mall that was being put on by people who promote movies, and one of the promotional items they were giving away was a baseball cap that says 3 Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri. Really more of a trucker hat with the mesh background. So I have this hat. I like it. I wear it a lot. This is a weird movie to have a hat of, let me tell you that. Three Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri. Tremendous movie, 4.5 stars. That is going to do it for this episode of Every Movie Ever. Please join us next week when we will keep trying to review every movie ever made.